Dear colleagues, welcome to week 5 on estimating the cost and the financing of an education sector plan, presented by Ousmane Diouf from the International Institute for Educational Planning. This week will be about 4 presentations, and the first one will focus on costing of an education sector plan. It will be organized in 2 parts, and the first one will focus on how do we cost an education sector plan based on the programs and activities that are designed to address the priorities, and the second part will focus on how do we cost the main strategies that are designed in order to help achieve the SDG 4 target within the education sector plan. To cost an education sector plan, we need to consider these 10 following points. The logical framework will define the rationale between the activities, the programs, and the specific objectives that are measured by the performance indicators. And considering the logical framework at this stage of the costing will help to link the resources that are required for the plan and the specific objectives to achieve. Here is an example of a logical framework which is presenting the national priority of a country, the education sector priorities, the strategic objectives that are designed to help achieve or address these priorities, the programs of these specific objectives, and the sub-programs which are set of actions that are coherent and designed to help achieve these specific objectives and the activities of the actions. This step of the costing is dedicated to decision variable or performance indicators development and the target setting. For each of the specific objectives of the program's logical framework, we have to develop an indicators that will measure the expected results. Thereafter, we calculate the baseline value, set the target to reach by the end of the plan. Activities are developed to achieve the progress from the baseline to the target value. The cost of these activities will be the cost of the progress achieved from the base year by the end of the plan. Here is an example of the characteristic of a result framework. The specific objectives is to improve the learning conditions of the students, and the expected results is the number of students per teacher to be decreased, and the indicators to measure this expected result is the pupils-teacher ratio with a baseline value of 70 pupils per teacher and a target to achieve by the end of the plan of 45 pupils per teacher. This will require recruiting teachers, paying them salaries, and paying also their training, which will be costed in each year of the education sector plan. The demographic pressure is also one of the main drivers of the education sector plan cost. As you can see here on the world population by age and sex, more than 25% of them are in demand of education. This school-age population percentage is even higher in the developing world, as you can see here as an example of a country where the school-age population is almost increasing by 50% from 2017 to 2030, representing from 63% to almost 66% of the total population from 2017 to 2030. The policy objectives of an ESP integrating the international agenda is also one of the main drivers of an education sector plan cost. Improving the teaching and learning conditions of an increasing number of beneficiaries will definitely have a huge impact on the resource required to achieve the expected results, including the SDG 4 targets that are now measured in a very coherent and consistent results framework. The macroeconomic context is also something to study very carefully when you're costing an education sector plan. Some macroeconomic indicators like the exchange rate will have an impact on the cost of the items of your activities, and also the general level of prices measured by the inflation rate will have an impact on the unit cost. And since you are also costing your plan over a long period, sometimes it's very difficult, almost impossible to predict the inflation, which will require to work at constant price. Constant price means removing the impact of inflation on your cost by evaluating all expenditure at a constant price of a base year that you will have to choose. And this also will help you to compare different amount of money over the time. Now, after reviewing the main drivers of the cost of your ESP, you can start calculating the beneficiaries or the enrollment projections and the requirement in terms of teachers, infrastructures, goods and services, and then the financial requirement. The enrollment projections will be calculated based on the new intake, the enrollment policy objectives, and the flow rates to be able to estimate for each and every year the new intakes, the repeaters, and those students who are promoted from lower grade. It also has to consider the SDG 4 lifelong learning opportunities. It means some students may need to leave and join later the education system, which was not previously possible. Here is an example of enrollment projections where you can see within this policy objective conditions integrating the lifelong learning concepts how the total number of students are changing from 2017 to 2030. It's almost doubling, with the different gross enrollment rate you can measure for primary education, lower and upper secondary, and higher education. After calculating the projection of enrollment of the students, we can now calculate the projection of teachers and non-teachers required for the education system. To do so, we need to consider the teaching and learning conditions objectives as defined in the result framework, with the relevant indicators that will help to calculate the number of teachers within the different calculation method you have. To calculate the projection of teachers for each year of your education sector plan in a system where they are used by groups, you first need to estimate the number of students divided by the students per group ratio to be able to estimate the total number of groups in the system, and associate it with the teacher per group ratio to be estimate the total number of teachers required in the system. To estimate the number of teachers in the system where they work per subject, you first need to consider the number of students, organize them by groups or pedagogical groups to be able to estimate the total number of hours that is required for your system. And considering that each teacher has an official workload to take per week, you can divide this total number of hours required for your system by the official weekly number of period a teacher has to take to be able to calculate the total number of teachers required for your system. After estimating the enrollment projections, we organize the students in pedagogical groups and apply the teaching and learning conditions objectives using the groups per classroom ratio. The same methodology applies for the other type of infrastructures, such as latrines, specialized classrooms. Here, to calculate the number of classrooms you need every year of the ESP, you need to consider the number of students divided by the number of students per group to be able to calculate the number of groups or pedagogical groups in the system associated with the group per classroom ratio to be able to know the number of classroom required in the system. And from here, since you will not rebuild the number of existing classrooms in the system, you will need to calculate the new classrooms you need to build every year for the new needs. And to do so, you need to take the new number of classrooms required for your current year, compare it with the previous stock of classroom in the system, and see if the difference is positive or negative. If it's positive, it means you will have to build the classrooms, and the absolute value will give you the number of classrooms to build. Now, after estimating the number of teachers required for the system, estimating the number of classrooms and specialized classes you need in the system, you will need to estimate the goods and services required for your education sector plan. And you will also have to consider here the budget nomenclature of your country to be able to cost items that are provided to run the schools. And in general, it's the teaching and learning materials, the utilities, electricity, telephone, internet, that are provided to run the schools. And to calculate the needs of these goods and services, in general, we use the number of students or the number of teachers or non-teachers or schools to be able to calculate the ratio for the baseline year, set a target for the end year of your plan, and calculate the intermediate value by linear projections, and link it back with the enrollment or the number of teachers or non-teachers or schools to be able to estimate the quantity of goods and services that are required every year. After calculating the items required for each and every activities and programs of your plan, you can estimate the financial value. And this financial value is the cost of the plan. It must be calculated at constant price to be able to remove the effect of inflation, and also to be able to calculate the cost over a period of time. Here is an example of projection of the cost of an education sector plan of a country, presented in a graphic in state of table. And you can see the cost by economic nature in million of unit currencies at constant price, that shows for each and every year the total of amount spent in investment, in transfers to the education institutions, for example, in goods and services, and salaries paid for teaching and non-teaching staff. Now, after explaining how to cost an education sector plan, we need to discuss how to cost the SDG 4 targets. We have two cases. You have countries who opt to develop an SDG 4 plan. For those countries, they will just have to apply the same process we have already explained for an education sector plan. And you have a second case is where countries have decided to integrate the SDG 4 strategies in the education sector plan. And for those countries, they will need to calculate the cost of the activities that are implemented in order to achieve the SDG 4 targets. And they will use this costing in order to monitor and evaluate the progress they are making in terms of SDG 4 targeting, and also in terms of reporting as they are committed to achieve the SDG 4 by 2030. And for those countries, the first thing to do is to map all the activities of the programs that are designed in order to achieve some specific objectives. And look at the indicators. See which of these activities are designed to achieve a specific target of the SDG 4. And after having these classifications, we can cost all those activities as we just did in the previous part of the presentation of the costing of the ESP, to be able to have the cost of all the strategies and the activities that are designed and implemented in order to achieve SDG 4. Here now is an example of a country who have costed the activities and the strategies they have developed in order to achieve the SDG 4 target. It's presented by economic nature for the period of 2017-2030. It's worth here to mention that these are cost projection of cost. It doesn't mean this is what they will have to cost. This is developed within the program-based budgeting approach or result-based budgeting approach, where they are linking the resource to spend and the quantity of results they need to achieve. And by this approach, we can also cost each and every targets of the SDG 4 by economic nature for the period of 2017 to 2030. We can also link it with indicators or performance indicators that are designed in the result framework of the SDG 4 to be able to link the resources that are spent for the SDG 4 and the progress they are making to achieve the targets. You can also see here the cost of target 4.4, which is mainly about investment. Here you can also see the cost of the target 4.5 and the different gender parity index for the level of education that are calculated in relation with the resource spent for the achievement. And here the cost of target 4.7, which is clear for countries in terms of strategies and activities to implement, but still is very difficult to measure the progress they are making in terms of performance indicators. And I think that's also where we as specialists have to work to be able to agree on measurement tools that will be able to see the progress they are making in achieving this target. Now we can also calculate the unit cost per SDG 4 target. And here you can see an example of 4.1, what's spent or what is projected to be spent by a student from 2017 to 2030 to be able to achieve what was just shown in the previous slide for the cost of the SDG 4 in terms of target.